I worked nights, weekends, built every pitch deck, coached him through every boardroom moment.
Babe, they trust me. I'll make sure you get the credit. Eventually.
Then I heard him say it, on a call he forgot to mute. Don't worry, Ava. The promotion's yours. She won't even see it coming.
It's not stealing if she never speaks up.
I watched them smile at each other across the conference table while they handed my dream job to his mistress. That night, I whispered one thing to myself. If I could go back, I'd never build anything for someone else again. The next morning, I opened my eyes, 1 year earlier. Same desk, same emails. But this time, I wasn't building a career for him. I was building an empire for me.
Ethan once told me I had a mind like a scalpel, sharp, efficient, surgical. I used to think that was his way of loving me, recognizing my contribution, even though I always stood behind the curtain while he took the bow. We joined Embertech together, fresh out of grad school. He was bold, charming, articulate. I was the engine under the hood. Every idea he presented had my fingerprints on it, strategy, product design, user psychology, but I let him take credit because we were a team. I believed his win was mine too. And when whispers started about a new director of innovation position, he looked me in the eye and said, "It's yours. No one deserves it more." But that same week, I overheard him on a call, one he didn't realize I could hear. "Don't worry, babe," he said. "The promotion's yours. She won't even see it coming." I didn't move. Couldn't breathe. And when I saw Ava, the glossy new hire with loud perfume and louder laughter, smiling at him the next morning, I knew. He wasn't just betraying me in love. He was betraying me in purpose. That night, I cried. And I whispered, if I could go back, I'd never let this happen again. I didn't expect the universe to listen. But when I opened my eyes the next morning, everything had changed. My inbox was different, older. The calendar read exactly 1 year earlier. My mug still had the wrong logo on it, from before the company rebranded. And the photo of Ethan and me at last year's company retreat, still smiling, still perfect, was back on my desk. I sat frozen. Not dreaming. Not hallucinating. This was real. A reset. 1 full year before he handed my future to someone else. I should have screamed. Panicked. But instead, I smiled. Because I remembered every move he was about to make. Every shady conversation. Every gaslight. Every whisper between him and Ava behind the glass doors. And this time, I wasn't going to play dumb. I wasn't going to give him my strategy, my silence, or my loyalty. This time, I would play smarter. Slower. Colder. Let him think I was still that sweet, dependable girl who kept the machine running while he soaked up the spotlight. Let them both underestimate me. Because the ending hadn't changed, only who would be holding the power when it came. I started small. Said yes to Ethan's morning coffee. Laughed at his jokes. Let him drape his arm across my chair at team meetings like nothing had changed. Let Ava throw me sideways glances and pretend she wasn't already practicing for the role I had earned. But at night, I worked. I backed up everything, emails, files, timelines. I reached out to Dina, the quiet UI genius Ethan once called too niche, and asked her to lunch. I told her I had a new idea. A spin-off. Discreet. Something I wanted to patent under my own name. Her eyes lit up. If it's you, I'm in. Then I reached out to Charles, the shy back-end engineer everyone overlooked. I pitched him the vision, gave him the real numbers. By the end of the week, I had a skeleton team Ethan didn't know existed. I smiled in meetings. I delivered clean slide decks. And behind the scenes, I was building the future he thought he had stolen. Only this time, he wasn't getting a piece of it. He was just walking straight into the shadow of something that had never belonged to him to begin with. Ava started shadowing me 2 weeks in, same as last time. Ethan said I should learn from the best, she purred, pulling up a chair beside me. I offered a soft smile and said, happy to help. And I was. because every answer I gave her was measured, curated, and one step behind what I was really working on. She thought she was gathering leverage. But I was giving her noise. And Ethan? He barely noticed the difference. "You're amazing," he told me one night after reviewing a strategy doc. "You make me look good." I smiled. "I know." He kissed me on the forehead, like always. And I made a note to revoke his access to the shared folders by the end of the month. The thing about betrayal is, once you've seen someone's true face, you never forget the angle of their smile. I was done trying to change him. Now I was just keeping him where I needed him, close, cocky, and completely unaware that I was no longer building his future. I was building mine. When Ethan started prepping for the promotion pitch, I pretended not to notice. He stayed late rehearsing in conference rooms, tweaking slides I'd already perfected. "I want you there when I present," he said. "It's as much your win as mine." I nodded, even as I was rewriting the product roadmap under my own LLC. The night before the pitch, he held my hand and said, "You've always been the brains. I'm just the voice." And for a second, I wanted to believe that meant something. But I remembered the voice on that call. "She won't even see it coming." So I leaned in, kissed him gently, and said, "Then make sure they hear you." The next morning, I wore my best blazer and sat in the audience with my silent team watching Ethan pitch my innovation to the board. He was magnetic, polished, confident. But he didn't realize that this time, I had filed for public IP protection the night before. Under my name. With a timestamp. Let him shine. Let Ava beam from the sidelines. Their spotlight was burning on borrowed time, and I had just pulled the plug on their power. After Ethan's pitch, the room buzzed. Board members clapped politely. One or two nodded with measured interest. And Ava clung to his arm like they'd just sealed a billion-dollar deal. I waited. I gave it 3 days. Just enough time for them to relax. Ethan strutted through the office like he was already wearing a new title. Ava started calling herself future director in front of interns. I let it all pass, every smirk, every fake compliment, every dig wrapped in sugar. And then, the press release dropped. Not Embertech's. Mine. Breakthrough innovation filed by independent tech group led by anonymous founder. The language was deliberate. The design was familiar enough that anyone with a brain in the room would feel a twinge of recognition, but wouldn't be able to prove a thing. Within hours, whispers started. Investors called the company asking questions. Ethan stormed into my office, flushed. "Did you leak our roadmap?" I looked up, blinked, and said, "What roadmap?" He stared at me, eyes wild, realizing he didn't even know where his files ended and mine began. Because the truth? They never started with him. I just stopped pretending he was anything more than a microphone for ideas that were never his. The next day, I called a private meeting with Embertech's smallest shareholders, people who had long been overlooked in the noise of Ethan's posturing. I pitched them a better path. A quiet buyout, equal voting shares, and a merger with the shell company I had formed over the past 6 weeks. "You'll lose nothing," I said. "But you'll finally gain control." They agreed, eagerly. Most had never even been invited to a strategy meeting before. Within 4 days, I held enough influence to stop Ethan's promotion before the ink dried. He found out the night before the board's vote. He came home silent. Didn't eat. Didn't ask. Just sat in the dark, staring at the wall while I folded laundry. I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered how he looked at Ava that day. Like I was the afterthought. The tool. The fool. So I sat beside him and said softly, "You still want me in the room tomorrow?" He didn't answer. Because he knew. Something had shifted, and for once, I wasn't rushing to fix it. I was letting it fracture. Because not every break needs to be mended. Some are meant to break all the way through. At the board meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early. I wore all black, not for mourning but for war. Ava was already there, nervously flipping through her notes. Ethan sat beside her, jaw clenched, fingers tapping against the table like a ticking clock. When I walked in, neither of them looked at me. Good. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to speak. The chairman opened with a soft clearing of his throat. "We've had an unusual development," he said. And then he passed the floor to me. Ethan's head snapped toward me. "What's she doing here?" he barked. The room froze. I stood calmly. "I'd like to present a conflict of interest disclosure," I said, handing over documentation. "I'm the legal holder of the intellectual property Ethan presented last week. I filed it under my LLC 2 days prior. Full timestamp history is included." Silence dropped like a curtain. Ava blinked. Ethan stammered. I sat down without another word. The damage was done. The moment he tried to speak, the chairman raised a hand. "We'll review this in executive session." Meeting adjourned. Ethan didn't move. He looked like a man watching his kingdom turn to dust before his eyes. I left without waiting. Power doesn't linger. It lands and moves on. Outside, Dina and Charles were waiting for me by the elevators. "It's done?" she asked. I nodded. First move landed. We didn't hug. Didn't cheer. This wasn't a win. This was positioning. And now that the pieces were moving, the checkmate would be quieter than anyone expected. By the time Ethan got back to his office, his access had already been revoked. HR was briefed. Legal was reviewing every past project he claimed as his own. Ava stormed out an hour later, her heels clacking like warning shots through the hallway. I watched from the rooftop, sipping coffee. I didn't need to gloat. Their downfall wasn't theatrical, it was procedural. I didn't burn their world. I simply pulled the threads they never realized I'd sewn. And when everything unraveled, I'd already built something new, something theirs could never touch. That's the thing about rebirth, it's not a second chance. It's a second strategy. And this time, I didn't just have the plan. I was the plan. Let Ethan wonder how I did it. Let Ava fume in silence. The answer was simple. They gave me motive. I gave them consequence. 2 days later, I made it official. I stepped down from Embertech, not with shame, but with precision. My name was already trending in startup spaces. Tech blogs were calling me the ghost behind Embertech's glow-up. I released a quiet statement: sometimes you outgrow the rooms you once helped build. I'm excited for what's next. Ethan didn't speak. Ava deactivated her socials. But that wasn't silence, it was surrender. Meanwhile, my own company, now public under the name Lumen Code, unveiled its debut product. A sleek platform built around the very framework Ethan tried to steal. Only this time, it was branded with the name of every woman who helped me build it. Equal shares. Transparent leadership. No Ethan. No false idols. And when the first media request rolled in, asking me to comment on Embertech's fallout, I simply replied, that story's already written. I'm busy writing a better one. Because I didn't need to relive betrayal. I had transformed it into architecture. Every betrayal became a brick. Every humiliation, a nail. And now the house I lived in was made of steel, and stories no man would ever own again. It took less than a week for the silence to turn into noise. Investors pulled out of Embertech. Key partners began asking for audits. The project Ethan had promised would launch in Q3 was revealed to have no development plan at all, because I had taken every framework, every working model, and buried it under my own copyright. Meanwhile, Lumen Code was exploding. We launched with a limited access beta and still crashed servers from demand. Every user was engaged. Every feature refined. And I made sure every woman on my team stood beside me on camera. Not behind. Beside. My photo went viral, me standing with Dina, Charles, and 3 other women I once mentored in secret Slack channels. She didn't just leave the company, one tweet said, she took its soul and gave it to someone worthy. I didn't comment. I didn't post selfies or shade. I stayed focused. I was rebuilding something in silence again, but this time, the silence wasn't forced. It was chosen. It was mine. And while Embertech scrambled to figure out what they even were without me, I already knew who I was. Not his assistant. Not the shadow. I was the one who made everything possible, on purpose. Ethan resurfaced in small ways, articles defending his record, anonymous posts attacking mine. She was just the admin, one read. He built the structure. I didn't respond. My team wanted to clap back, but I said no. Because I didn't need to prove what I had already lived. The proof was in the product, the culture, the faces of the interns who walked into our office and felt like they belonged. Ethan built a house of mirrors. I built a foundation with glass floors, transparent, solid, and impossible to shatter. Ava tried to reinvent herself as a founder too. I watched her pitch a copycat product to a panel that included my former mentor. It didn't go well. Her demo crashed halfway through, and the investors didn't ask for a follow-up. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just clarity. They had both tried to use me as a step stool. And instead, they fell off the ladder while I climbed without them. Sometimes, the best payback is building what they swore you couldn't, then making it so beautiful they can't even pretend they don't see it. 3 months later, I got the email. It was from a corporate recruiter for Embertech. Our leadership team is undergoing a restructure, it said. We'd love to talk about consulting opportunities. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Ethan must have been desperate, or blind, or both. I forwarded the email to Charles and typed just 2 words, "Your turn." He replied with a gif of a throne. We didn't reply to the recruiter. Instead, we sent a polite rejection, signed from the Office of Strategic Growth at Lumen Code. No explanation. No tone. Just professional distance so thick it felt like glass. Ava, I heard, had taken a junior product role in a startup that was struggling to get seed funding. She was no longer smug. Just quiet. Just absent. And Ethan? He tried to pitch a solo project last month, something that suspiciously resembled my early roadmap. It didn't land. He wasn't a star anymore. Because people didn't just forget what he did. They remembered what he lacked. And in this world? Talent may open the door, but integrity keeps it open. And Ethan had long since locked himself out. I didn't block him. Never needed to. One day, he sent a final message. No subject line. Just a single sentence. I didn't realize what I was standing on. I didn't reply. What was there to say? He had stood on my back for years, mistaking elevation for his own greatness. And now that I wasn't holding him up, he'd fallen like gravity had finally noticed him. That's what always happens when people mistake your support for their entitlement. I used to cry over that. Over how invisible I felt even when I was doing the most. But now? Now I was visible not because I demanded to be, but because I had built something that couldn't be hidden anymore. I had become undeniable. And when you're undeniable, you don't chase the mic. You become the stage. The conversation. The new standard. Ethan was just one man. One chapter. My story had become a movement. The day I made Ava my assistant was quiet. Professional. Almost cold. I offered her the position after she applied anonymously to an open admin role through our portal. Her resume was polished. Her tone humble. The girl who once tossed her hair and whispered plans with Ethan had shrunk into someone I almost didn't recognize. I didn't gloat. I just invited her into the interview room, reviewed her application, and said, "If you accept, you'll be working directly under me." She nodded. I know. Her voice didn't hold any edge. Just exhaustion. Desperation. Then we'll start with a 90-day trial, I said. You'll need to attend training. The same one I created and once offered you both, for free. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Thank you." And that was that. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just gravity. Realigned. The woman who helped steal my future was now reporting to the one who reclaimed it and turned it into something worth protecting. Ava didn't cry. But I think she understood. This wasn't about her anymore. It never really was. It was about building a world where no woman had to beg to be seen again. When Ava started training, she never spoke more than necessary. She arrived early, took notes, made no excuses. And I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. The air between us held the history. She knew what she had tried to become. And now she had to live with the quiet truth. She had once mocked the woman, now teaching her what real leadership looked like. But I didn't build Lumen Code to humiliate her. I built it to heal the space she once tried to dominate. A month into her trial, she handed me a revised meeting deck, clean, efficient, no flair. I nodded, better. But don't mimic me. Find your own spine. She blinked, stunned. I'm trying. I softened, Just enough to let her know I wasn't her enemy. Good. Then keep going. The real revenge wasn't making her obey, it was making her grow. Because when you can teach the very person who replaced you how to rebuild, you prove you were never replaceable to begin with. That was power. Not silence. Not applause. Just evolution. Measured in progress, not in pain. Ava thought she had stolen my place. But I was never meant to stay in that room. I was meant to build my own. The company newsletter went out the next morning. A profile on our journey, our values, and our founding story. Built from betrayal, powered by purpose, it read. Interns screenshotted it. Alumni posted it on LinkedIn. Women from across industries DM'd me, saying, "You just put into words what I lived through and never processed." I didn't reply to everyone, I couldn't, but I saw every message. And I felt them like bricks laid beneath my feet. I wasn't walking alone anymore. I had become a blueprint. A quiet roadmap for what it means to be used, discarded, underestimated, and then to rise without screaming. That was what made this story land differently. It wasn't a comeback driven by noise. It was strategy, grace, and consequence in motion. And the louder Ethan's silence got, the more powerful my message became. Because he had always relied on being the voice. But now, I had become the echo, endless, undeniable, repeated by women who didn't need to shout to be heard. They just needed to be seen. And finally, they were. Because I was. And I had no intention of fading ever again. I was invited to speak at the same tech summit Ethan once begged to get into. The email subject line read, "Headliner offer, your story inspires us." I accepted without hesitation. No nerves. No second thoughts. Just a knowing calm. I wasn't the understudy anymore. I was the show. On the day of the summit, I wore a slate gray suit with a black silk blouse. Understated. Commanding. My team came with me, Dina, Charles, our new rising stars. Even Ava stood at the edge of the crowd, clipboard in hand. When I stepped onto that stage and the lights hit, I didn't think about Ethan or the boardroom he stole from me. I thought about the thousands of women watching online. The ones in small offices, at kitchen tables, trying to write themselves back into stories they had been erased from. They told me I was too quiet to lead, I said. Too soft to own ideas. Too trusting to protect them. And maybe I was. Once. But then I got tired of being the reason someone else succeeded, and decided to become the reason I did. The room was still. And then came the thunder. After the talk, people waited in line just to thank me. Not to pitch. Not to network. Just to say, "You gave me a mirror." A teacher said she used my speech to talk to her students about leadership. A woman from legal whispered, "I thought I was crazy for feeling stolen from, until I heard you." I didn't cry. I didn't smile big. I just nodded. Because I knew what that meant. My story had cracked something open. Not just for me, but for them. For the versions of me who were still stuck in conference rooms being spoken over. Still crying in bathrooms after credit was handed to someone louder, taller, bolder, but not better. I had once begged Ethan to see me. Now strangers did. I once thought I had to stay silent to keep my seat at the table. Now I built the table. I invited the guests. And I set the rules. Quiet revenge might have been the hook. But what I was living now. It was rebirth. With receipts. And I had no intention of folding it into a footnote ever again. That night, after the summit, I sat alone on my balcony, scrolling through the photos. My name on the backdrop. My words quoted in captions. Ava had even posted a selfie from backstage with the caption, "Learning from the best." I stared at it for a long time. She hadn't tagged me. But she didn't have to. The world knew who she meant. I thought about blocking her. Muting her. Erasing her from the picture like she tried to erase me. But I didn't. Because her presence in the background told a deeper story. Not about rivalry. But evolution. Growth. Even redemption. She didn't win. She didn't conquer. She didn't even last. But she learned. And if she could learn, so could others. My revenge didn't need to be cruel. It just needed to be visible. A record. A map. A fire lit without smoke. And this was enough. Seeing her in that frame, finally recognizing the woman she tried to imitate, and knowing I had no need to be bitter anymore. That was closure. Not the kind that slams doors, but the kind that opens a dozen new ones, wide enough for others to follow through. I began mentoring again, this time intentionally. I created a quiet initiative at Lumen Code called Backstage Women, for those who'd spent their careers being the silent strength behind louder men. We held sessions on IP ownership, negotiating credit, knowing when to walk, and when to build your own door. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it was effective. One woman cried after I read her resume aloud and said, "This is leadership. Not support. Start claiming it." I watched her posture shift, like a curtain pulled back. These weren't just workshops. They were unlearning rooms. Safe spaces to rip off the humble labels we'd all worn like shackles. And Ethan? He faded even more. Occasionally I'd hear his name mentioned in gossip groups or niche startup newsletters, always in past tense. Didn't he used to be someone? Wasn't he connected to Lumen somehow? But no one really remembered. He was never the product. He was the packaging. Loud. Disposable. Unnecessary. And as for Ava, she remained in the background, never overstepping, always learning. Not my friend. Not my enemy. Just another woman finally figuring out her worth, after trying to borrow mine. And honestly, that was enough for me. I hosted a panel called The Power of the Quiet Builder. It sold out. We had no stage makeup, no heels, no rehearsed slogans, just a group of women who'd once been erased and now ran companies, departments, labs. We didn't talk about the men who underestimated us. We talked about the moment we stopped underestimating ourselves. It hit different. Stronger. Not angry, unapologetic. After the panel, a journalist asked me off record, "Would you ever forgive the people who tried to bury you?" I thought about it. "I don't need to," I said. "I'm not carrying them." And I meant it. I hadn't healed because they changed. I'd healed because I changed. The same way fire doesn't burn twice if the structure it touched no longer exists. I wasn't flammable anymore. There was nothing left of the girl who begged Ethan to give her credit, to remember her name, to treat her as more than a springboard. That girl was gone. And the woman standing here didn't want his validation. She had rebuilt so completely that she was now the proof. Forgiveness was irrelevant. Growth was the point. And I had already outgrown everything they thought would define me. The next product launch was fully run by my mentorship team. I didn't even present. I sat in the back, watched as they took the stage with confidence, and I smiled. Because that was the dream, not being the center, but building a system so strong that it didn't need me to hold it anymore. That was real success. When women who once doubted themselves stood tall without shrinking. When no one whispered after meetings, "She's intense," but instead said, "She's clear." When no one waited to be chosen, they just led. And I wasn't just watching it. I was funding it. Protecting it. Growing it. Quietly, deliberately, permanently. The kind of leadership you don't need to pitch. You just live it, and others recognize it in your presence. Like an atmosphere. Ethan had never understood that. His version of leadership needed spotlights. Applause. Praise. But mine? Mine made everyone else shine brighter. And that kind of light? Doesn't dim. It reflects. Multiplies. Stays. Long after the clapping stops. That was the difference. He built noise. I built culture. He built image. I built identity. And only one of those lasts. A tech outlet finally reached out for a retrospective on Embertech's leadership fallout. "We'd love your side of the story," they said. "Off the record or on." I took a breath, sat with it, then replied, "I've already told my story. It's called Lumen Code." And that was the truth. I didn't need to explain what happened anymore. The product worked. The people stayed. The message was embedded into every new hire, every company policy, every decision we made. We do not reward betrayal. We reward brilliance. We don't hire charm. We cultivate integrity. And every time someone asked how we built this, the answer remained simple, intentionally. Nothing we created was by accident. It was all by choice. Ethan used to say I was lucky to have him. But now? People said they were lucky to work with me. And I didn't let that make me arrogant. I let it keep me grateful. Because the real win wasn't that I'd survived being underestimated, it's that I'd built a world where the next woman wouldn't be. I was no longer just my own rebirth. I was a ripple. And Ethan? He was the reason. But he was no longer the story. That weekend, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was Ethan's. Just a single sheet of paper. I was wrong. About you. About everything. I didn't think someone like you would ever leave, let alone win. But you did. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know, I see it now. I folded the letter and set it aside. Didn't burn it. Didn't frame it. Just placed it quietly in a drawer marked, not needed. Because I didn't need his words to feel validated. I didn't need his apology to make peace with my past. I already had. Long ago. Still, there was something satisfying in knowing that even he, finally, saw it. Not my pain. Not my revenge. But my power. And how I'd carried it all along. He just couldn't recognize it when it was wrapped in kindness. And now that it was built into structure, contracts, capital, and legacy, it was unmissable. And that, more than anything, was the most powerful ending I could have asked for. One where I didn't need to win loud. I just needed to never look back. The next hiring round at Lumen Code drew hundreds of applicants. Most were women. Many mentioned the panel, the mentorship, or that talk you gave that made me quit my old job and finally build something of my own. I reviewed every application. Not just for qualifications, but for voice, for fire, for the quiet rage turned into purpose. One cover letter read, I used to think success was being tolerated in rooms that didn't want me. Then I saw what you built and realized. I could build one too. That's when it hit me, the point was never to dominate the industry. It was to shift it. I wasn't just in tech anymore. I was part of a movement. I was legacy in progress. A name whispered not with awe, but with direction. The kind of name that lives on company walls, in grant titles, in case studies for what happens when someone decides not to beg for a seat, but to blueprint the table from scratch. And the best part? No one could erase it. Not Ethan. Not his silence. Not the old version of me. Because this wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. It was always about becoming undeniable. That summer, I was invited to a roundtable for women in tech policy, behind closed doors, high level, no recordings. Just voices that shaped futures. I sat beside CEOs, researchers, senators. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about architecture. About building companies where people didn't just exist, they thrive. I said, make space for the quiet ones. Because when they finally speak, they change everything. Heads nodded. Notes were scribbled. And when the meeting ended, one woman from a global firm pulled me aside and said, I used to work for a man like Ethan. I never had the words until you said them. I smiled. Not because I was flattered, but because I remembered what it felt like to be wordless. To feel something wrong and not know how to name it. And now not only did I know the words, I had spoken them out loud, into places that could actually make change. That's what this all became in the end. Not revenge. Not retribution. But translation. Turning pain into policy. Silence into structure. Memory into movement. And for the first time ever, I wasn't trying to be heard. I already was. I started receiving letters. Handwritten. Emailed. DMs. From interns. From women returning to work after years away. From teenage girls starting their first coding class. They didn't ask for advice. They just told their truths. He made me feel invisible. They laughed when I asked for credit. I thought I was alone. I read them all. Some I printed and pinned to a corkboard in my office, a constellation of proof. That my voice had created space for theirs. That I wasn't just healed, I was healing others. Quietly. Continually. And the ripple had become a wave. Not a viral moment. But a sustainable, structured shift. That's what legacy is. Not the loudest applause. But the longest echo. Ethan used to say, no one remembers who started it, they remember who sold it. He was wrong. They remember who built it, who bled for it, who passed it on better than they found it. And I had done that. Not for revenge. Not for validation. But because it was the right thing to do. And because I could. That's the part he never understood. I didn't want to win. I just wanted everyone to stop losing. Ava completed her 90-day trial with near perfection. She was efficient, humble, and quiet. When I called her into my office, she walked in prepared to be dismissed. But I said, "You've earned full time." Her eyes widened. "Why?" I answered honestly. "Because you stopped pretending." She nodded. No tears. Just quiet resolve. That's when I realized, redemption isn't dramatic. It's slow. It's silent. It looks like doing the work with your head down and your ego folded away. She wasn't my friend. But she wasn't my villain anymore either. She was proof that even those who betray you can grow. If they're willing to. And that kind of growth? It matters more than the grudge. I stood, shook her hand, and added, "Don't waste it." She didn't. She still works with us, still quiet, still learning. And now? She trains new hires. She leads quietly. She corrects resumes that undersell brilliance. She teaches younger women what she once failed to see. And that ripple matters. Because I didn't just change the path, I changed the players. And that's what rebirth really is. Not just surviving what they did to you, but shifting what you do next. I saw Ethan one final time. At an event I spoke at. He wasn't there to listen. He was catering, carrying drinks, wearing a name tag that no one recognized. We made eye contact. Just briefly. No words. No drama. Just silence. And in that silence I saw it, he finally understood. That I didn't just leave him. I left the version of myself who ever needed him. And that was something he couldn't chase. Couldn't copy. Couldn't undo. I didn't hate him. I didn't even pity him. I just no longer needed to acknowledge him. He had become what he made me feel once, invisible. I walked past him and onto the stage. The lights warmed my face. The crowd leaned in. And my first line wasn't about revenge, or pain, or betrayal. It was this: when they say you're too soft to lead, remember, fire starts quiet too. The applause was thunderous. But I didn't smile for them. I smiled for me. Because I had done the impossible. I didn't just rebuild. I rewrote. And this time, every line was mine.